All right, so chapter 6, Rise of the Muslim Empires. You already saw this. Do not start writing. This is simply to show you that there is material on the Bedouins in case you felt like the movie was not helpful. So it'll give you some basic information, and then it'll take them through all the major categories that we always discuss. So geography, society, politics, religion, art, economy, technology, and you can feel like you got your information on the Bedouin. You can either watch it through this video and just pause it on each slide, or we'll have a copy of the slideshow up as well so you don't feel so rushed. But what we want to talk about today is from this point forward. The movie showed you the life of the Bedouin, nomadic peoples in the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, spending most of their life moving from oasis to oasis to oasis with their herds of animals. Occasionally, you would have caravans of merchants traveling through some of the major cities in that part of the world, and you did have a couple of big cities on the Arabian Peninsula, specifically which two? Mecca and Medina. And it's with those two cities that the story of Muhammad is really focused on. Now, Muhammad grew up in Mecca. He eventually goes and lives with the Bedouin, and that's where he becomes a merchant and where he meets his wife. And it's during that time that he receives his revelation from Allah. And then begins the process of spreading God's word to the Bedouin people as well as the people that are living in Mecca. And you need to know a couple of things about this. First, and we already talked about it with the Kaaba. The Kaaba represents all of the different tribal gods that the Bedouin believed in. Some of those tribes were already professing a belief in a single God, in Allah, which is Arabic for God. So Muhammad is not the first person to introduce the idea of a monotheistic faith. He's simply going to become the most persuasive. He will be, as Muslims look at it, he will be the final prophet, the final person to reveal God's word to mankind. And so we're going to see the life of Muhammad then. Born in 570 and then has about 10 years during his adult life, during which time he receives this revelation and then turns that revelation into a guiding force for people in that part of the world. What we're most interested in today is the period after his death, when the teachings of Islam have now been preserved, but Muhammad himself is no longer there as a guide for this early community of believers. And what we're going to find is, first, a period known as the period of the first four caliphs, or caliphs, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And what this quickly turns into is a legitimate, full-blown empire, split up into two parts. The first being the Umayyad Empire, and the Umayyads was one of the tribes that was particularly powerful in Mecca. And then the second, the Abbasid Empire, which is going to run for much longer than the Umayyad did. So they're going to build upon what Muhammad starts. They're going to embrace Islam as a unifying force in their community. And then they're going to expand upon it and use it not just as a unifying force, but also as an expansionist force, as a motivation to go out and spread. And then to ruin the ending, we're going to flip to the end of the book. They will collapse, as every single other empire that we've studied so far has done. And if you look at why they collapse, what do you notice? Corruption and invasion. Is this similar to or different from other civilizations? Similar to. Similar to how many other civilizations we've studied? Rome, China, India. So basically all of them, right? So are we noticing a pattern?
Yes.
All right, I know lots of people think history is boring, and hopefully already you've found that that's not always true. But for me, this is one of the boring parts. It's like, come on, can't we get a new ending? It's like new story, same ending.
Like something tragic rather than, oh, corruption and...
Right, like I want natural disaster. I want asteroid. I want aliens.
Something that was just totally unpreventable.
Right, I want a twist at the end.
Unpreventable, and you couldn't prepare for it rather than, oh, they got lazy and they couldn't hold off the invaders because of that.
Exactly. Like I'm picturing this guy in my head who's writing the story of these civilizations, even though that's not how it works. And then like he gets to the end of the book and he's like, he's tired, it's late at night, and he's like, yeah, I'm just going to phone this one in. Where's the last page from that last book I wrote? Here you go. Great story, all the way up to this point, carbon copied ending. Be like, come on, dude. You got to give me something new. You're going to find this a lot throughout history. What? Well, sadly, as we looked at the end of civilizations, what did we say always happens? Is it ever just invasion?
No.
Is it ever just corruption?
No.
Right. It's everything happening at once. It's internal and external factors converging to totally screw up a civilization. You're going to see this a lot. Failure within, problems without. So, let's take a look. Geography. How many of you will freely admit geography is not your strength? All right. We're going to try to help you with that. Now, this was while the copier was still functioning. I have a map here for you. You are welcome to try to scramble to get it done now, or you can look this up later. But this will hopefully improve your knowledge of what we call Southwest Asia. Now, we say Southwest Asia, but when normal people are talking, what do we typically refer to that part of the world as? The Middle East. But again, if you look at a map of Asia, what's India? South Asia, what's China? East Asia, what's a large chunk of Russia? North Asia, what's like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia? Southeast. So if we put a dot in the middle of Asia, and coming into this part of the world, what continent is it on? It's in Asia. I mean, we're not in Africa yet. So when we say Middle East, have you ever stopped and thought about what does that really mean?
It's in the middle between Europe and Africa.
Right, it's in the middle of the Eastern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
But I mean, have you ever stopped and thought about that phrase Middle East? Like, is it in the middle of the East? Is it in the middle between East and West? Like, it's really kind of a confusing descriptor. And so what you'll find with the AP curriculum is that they most often refer to this part of the world as Southwest Asia. And so that's a term that you want to get familiar with now, because if you ever see it at the end of the year on a test or an essay question, you'll be scratching your head like, Southwest Asia? What is that? Well, it's this. Now, fun things to look at here. I know many of you are not real big on dates, but I want you to see how fast this empire expands. Now, Muhammad, again, anybody write down when he's born? 570. It's not until 622 that we actually start seeing the birth of a Muslim civilization. So in 10 years, they've already unified most of the Arabian Peninsula. In and of itself, that's pretty impressive. 10 years ago, all I had managed to do was get through a couple years of college. Clearly, I have not been nearly as successful. Now we're going to fast forward 29 years after Muhammad's death, and they've expanded from the majority of the Arabian Peninsula to everything in the dark orange. So that's 30 years. That's as long as I've been alive. They've conquered all of that. And then we're going to go 89 years after that. And they will have conquered the remainder of North Africa, crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, and taken most of Spain and all of Portugal. And at the same time, gone the opposite direction, conquering the remainder of Persia and getting into India.
Whenever I hear Gibraltar, all I think is that one movie. You know what I'm talking about?
I think I remember, yes. Not the same thing.
No.
Yes, ma'am.
Rock of Gibraltar.
What made it so that they could expand so quickly? Two things. One, their faith. It gives them a unified goal and a reason to cooperate with each other. So it ends some of the competition internally that other empires and armies suffer from. The second reason is they were predominantly already a nomadic group, which means they're used to life on the move. They pack light. They move quickly. It doesn't take a whole lot of organization and prodding and pleading and yelling and threatening to get them to all go. They're already a nomadic civilization. And so this concept of rapid movement with their stuff,
Nomadic civilization?
it's already pretty well entrenched.
Yeah, it seems kind of considered that.
The third thing, and the video talked about this that you watched last class, is that in a lot of the places that they were conquering, there were already corrupt governments in place. And so the people living under those corrupt governments were actually pretty psyched about a change, and especially one that the Muslims could offer, which was very unifying. Again, here's this faith that is all-inclusive. You can all belong to it if you want, but if you don't want to, it's fine. You can go on with life as normal. You know, part of the same reason the Mongols were so effective a couple hundred years later. Yes, they are overwhelmingly more powerful, but they're not going to fundamentally make you change the way you live. All we're asking for is your obedience and a tax or a tribute.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
The Mongols, you mean the Huns?
No, I mean the Mongols.
Oh, okay.
Right.
In the same area, though?
If you mean Central Asia, yes. All right. Good to go? Yes? Sure? Okay. So now that this empire is up and running, how is it actually run? Do we just need to allow for a moment for people to comment about the picture? Yes, it's Aladdin. No, we can't watch it. Moving on. Okay. Following Muhammad's death, there's a problem, and we're going to talk about that problem a little bit later. But the problem, in short, when Muhammad dies, is who comes next. And there are two schools of thought on this. And the reason there are two schools of thought on this is because the instructions were not made specifically clear prior to his death. And people from both groups think that Muhammad said something different. But the two schools of thought are this. On the one hand, clearly there was something special about Muhammad because God spoke to him and no one else. But on the other hand, and what most people seem to agree Muhammad said near the end of his life was, I'm not that special. I brought God's word to the people. God's word is what should be the focus, not me. And so like the video showed us, Muhammad didn't want to be worshipped. You know, when they show him in artwork, what do? They're right, they cover his face. So he cannot become an idol. And so Muhammad said, look, it's not me. I am not that special. God is what's special. God's word is what's special. And so there was a disagreement over who should have power. Should it be his son-in-law? Or should it be any member of his inner circle that was well-educated, charismatic, and understood God's word? And what we see is that the guy that takes power, Abu Bakr, belongs to that second group. A member of Muhammad's inner circle, but not directly related. And he is the one that's tasked with keeping this very young civilization together. And he's got it rough. I mean, he's not Muhammad. Right. That right there makes it difficult. And for those of you that follow sports, I mean, imagine, your superstar athlete, whatever your team is. Whenever that guy steps down and somebody new comes in to replace him, it's hard to fill those shoes. So A, he's not Muhammad. B, this civilization is not running smoothly yet. They have limited power, limited finances. Abu Bakr actually keeps his day job while he's running this new government. Can you imagine our president being president part of the day and then going to work part of the day? Right, just to make ends meet. But over time, power and wealth both will expand as this empire grows. And what we find is, as we go through the period of the first four caliphs and then into what will become known as the Umayyad Empire, because they grow so fast, they also grow incredibly wealthy very fast. To put it in maybe easier terms for you to understand, it'd be like winning the lottery. And so all of a sudden you go from being comfortably middle class to being rich. And we're not talking like the $1 or $2 million lottery. We're talking like when they get up stupid big to like 200 million. So you go to bed comfortably middle class, you wake up a multi-millionaire. What's the first thing you do? All right, you pay your taxes and make sure you actually won and you're not dreaming. But once the money's yours, do you go back to work? Do you keep driving your old beat-up car? Do you keep wearing the same clothes? Do you keep shopping in the same stores?
Probably.
All right, and some people do. But some people, when they're handed a huge amount of unexpected money, they upgrade. They go to the exotic car dealership and they buy a Lamborghini because they can. And then they stop shopping at Target and they go to high-end stores that aren't even in Tyson's because they can. And they sell the house they're living in and they buy a multi-million-dollar mansion even though it's just two of them because they can. What do you need 5 bedrooms for? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. For my entourage. Right, for my shoes. Why do you need an indoor theater? Just in case. Who says I can't have a bowling alley in my basement? If I can afford it, I'm going to buy it. We find this happening with the caliphs. The later ones especially, as this empire grows. They fall victim, and you're going to hear this phrase a lot throughout the year. They fall victim to, they fall prey to the splendor of their newfound lifestyle. They fall victim to a life of luxury and comfort. They can afford better clothes, so they buy them. They can afford a nicer home, so they get one. They can afford more, they can afford more of whatever they want. Now imagine, let's take this lottery idea even bigger. You don't win 2 million. You don't win 200 million. You win a couple billion.
That's a lot of ice cream.
That's a lot of ice cream.
What?
You win so much money. I'd buy ice cream too, dude. And then I'd buy like 5 personal trainers to help me, be able to eat more ice cream. If you had that much money, 2, 3, $10 billion, do you worry about the price tag on anything now?
Not really.
No. I mean, you remember me telling you guys about that trip I took to the French Riviera this summer? Like, if you want one of those mega yachts that I was describing to you, where they have the garage for their smaller boat on the yacht,
How much would those cost?
a couple million. Wouldn't that be great to be able to say, how much does that cost? A couple million.
Compared to $1 billion.
Right. I happen to have that in my wallet. What a coincidence. Would you like that in hundreds or thousands? Imagine having that kind of wealth. That somebody says, how much is that? A couple $1 million. Oh, I'll take 3.
That was like the thing from the children who
Exactly. Imagine having that degree of wealth. You can do whatever you want. There are no limitations. That is the amount of wealth that these caliphs fall into as this empire expands. And that's part of why I throw Aladdin up here. If you guys think back to that movie, don't start singing, don't talk about it. Have you seen it? Yeah, I've seen it. I love that. It's my favorite Disney movie. I like The Lion King more. No, we're not doing that. Just think. If you've seen this movie, think of the palace. Think of how monstrous the Sultan's palace is compared to everything else in the city of Agrabah. Think of what the Sultan wears compared to what the people in the streets wear. Can you picture this difference? I mean, picture how large, Jasmine's bedroom and that massive balcony she has. I mean, it's bigger than like 3 or 4 houses that you see on the street. And then imagine, you remember what the Sultan does with most of his spare time in the movie? He plays with toys. Like he's got that, mock-up model of the city, and it's got like the sun and the moon thing that flips up over the top of the model of his palace, and he plays with it, and he stacks up all his little animal toys. I've seen it once or twice, and I teach it every year. And I watch it like every Friday night. We should, except we're not going to. Anyway, I'll think about it. He has so much money. He doesn't even have to do his job. Who makes most of the decisions in the movie? Evil guy, Jafar. The guy with the beard that I'm incredibly envious of. Now, granted, he's got his magical snake staff, and so he's coercing the Sultan to do his stuff. But in reality, his position actually exists. It's called the wazir. Mm-hmm. Right. Wazir, which in the movie they call vizier, is the same title, just pronounced differently. That position existed. And in reality, it was pretty much carried out the same way, minus the magical snake staff.
And magic in general, talking parrot.
Well, right. I mean, I have one of those, but, So, as we progress through this empire, the sultans, which is the name that they adopt, they stop being caliphs and they become sultans. Same concept, though. They are the leader of both society and the faith. They have so much power and so much wealth, they don't have to rule, and they can just farm off their responsibilities on an assistant. Yes, ma'am?
So would the weird kind of be like how the King of England was one of the pretty things to look at while the Prime Minister does all the work?
Exactly. The caliphs and sultans eventually allow themselves to become essentially a figurehead. Yeah. Fabulous wealth, total comfort, come out and wave every once in a while. And again, think of what the Sultan does in the movie. He doesn't do a whole lot. Like his big political act is to come out and introduce Aladdin near the end of the movie. Like that's the only time he's ever seen interacting with the common people. That's it. He gets really excited about the parade when Aladdin first shows up, but he stays inside the palace to watch it. His only interaction with the common people is to come out on the balcony of the palace and address the screaming throngs that he can't even see because they're so far away from him, and let them know that Aladdin's going to get married to his daughter. Then he goes back inside. That's it. Very, very similar.
So it's still kind of leave you with that negative-ish feeling at the end that you think about it, right?
Yeah. Because the guy that's supposed to be in charge is about as hands-off as you can get. And the guy that's supposed to be an assistant is the one making all the decisions. So if things are going badly, who's going to get blamed? The Sultan. But who's the one making all the decisions? The Vizier. How great a position is that? Total power and zero responsibility.
The old Sultan gets kicked out or something when they want
Well, the downside for the Vizier is that he's the man behind the curtain. And so if power is what he wants, he's in a great position. But if recognition is what he wants, he's not going to get it. And so maybe he wants to aspire to become the Sultan so he can stop working. But if he really wants to be the puppet master, and
he wants to be recognized and the
well, then he's in the wrong civilization, because that ain't happening. Sahil, what's up?
Can't he just take up the mantle of what he's supposed to be doing?
The Vizier is by no means going to be hurting for money. He is going to be very comfortable. One second. He will not have as much as the Sultan, but yeah, he's not going to be poor. He will not even be middle class. He will be very comfortable. Yes, sir.
But if the Vizier becomes the Sultan, can't he have the power and recognition he wants?
No, because very quickly he's going to give in to the splendor of his lifestyle and realize, man, I don't have to work today. You, go take care of that. Like, if I could afford to pay somebody to grade all your papers for me, I would do it. And then on a day I'm not feeling well, I get some, history major, maybe from George Mason, be like, hey, I'm sick today, my kids still need to learn something. You come teach my class. Come teach him about the Mongols. He knows his stuff. He can do it. Bright, energetic young kid. So now before too long, I'm just taking a day off because I want to go on vacation. Hey, come back again. Go teach my class. Grade their papers, whatever. Man, 6 months from now, I'm showing up on back to school night to meet your parents and wave to them and say, hey, I'm your kid's teacher, and you guys never see me. Yes? This is absolutely part of what leads to the fall of it. Because is this government functioning well? No. Is there a huge disconnect between the people that are making the decisions and the people that are held responsible? Yes. And where are the common people in this picture? Nowhere. Nick?
Did the Islamic Empire, was it really the caliph, sultan, vizier? Were they the ones who were governing everything, or did they have bureaucracies?
As the empire grows, there's going to be some form of bureaucracy, simply because, again, when you have that much territory, you have to have a way to relay information. But what we're talking about here is probably more similar to China, where you've got somebody at the top that controls the whole thing and then just delegates. The other thing that's going to cause problems, though, and if you remember back to the beginning, we were talking about when Muhammad dies, there's two groups that disagree on what should happen next. The Sunni, and you guys learned this last year, yes?
Yeah, I don't know which one is which.
Okay. The Sunni are the ones that believe that any of Muhammad's inner circle would be acceptable as the new ruler. The Shia were the ones that believed that it had to be a close descendant of Muhammad. Yes, sir.
Does that mean if the Shia managed to get a close descendant of Muhammad who is into the role of being it, that the Sunni could possibly be okay with it? Because it's if he's
early on, that might have worked.
But now it's good.
But what happens is that because they don't feel like it's a compromise from the beginning, you have frustration, you have aggression, you have resentment, and so what this then feeds is a cycle of assassination and revenge, where because the first caliph after Muhammad is Sunni, the Shia are upset. They feel like their opinion wasn't given equal value. And so now they're really pushing to get Ali, his son-in-law, appointed as the next caliph. Well, he doesn't become the second caliph, and he doesn't become the third caliph. He becomes the fourth caliph finally, but by that point, the animosity is so deeply entrenched that what you get is hundreds of years of a cycle of mistrust and violence. You do still have violence between Shia and Sunni today. Yes. Nick?
Now, why is there still Shia and Sunni violence?
Really?
Catholic says,
How about Ireland?
What's going on in Ireland right now?
In Northern Ireland, you still have conflict between Catholics and Protestants, even though the split between Catholics and Protestants happened in the 1500s. You do still see this division in many major religions. You see frustrations between different groups within a religion, whether it's in the Jewish community with Orthodox Jews and Reformed Jews and Hasidic Jews. You see it in the Christian community between conservative Christians and Catholics and more liberal groups like Methodists. You do see this. Now, maybe you don't see death and mayhem in 21st century world the way that you could hundreds of years ago, but you certainly do still see conflict and resentment and frustration. Alia?
Where are they, like, is it, like, kind of just mixed up, Sunni and Shia? Like, is it mixed up, or is there, like,
There are places that are predominantly one or the other. One second. On the whole, globally, and I don't have the most updated numbers, but from what I remember, somewhere between 80 and 90% of all Muslims are Sunni. And so the Shia, even today, are a significant minority within that Muslim population. And I'm going to get this wrong because I don't remember it. I want to say that Iran
I think I read
is predominantly Shia.
Yeah, that's why it fought Iraq.
Right. And Iraq has a predominantly Sunni population, but under Saddam Hussein, the Shia minority had more influence. I think I'm getting that right. I might be getting it wrong. If I am, I apologize. But you do see in many places in Southwest Asia that there is a majority of one that not only represents the majority of the population, but also has the majority of the political and economic power. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, David.
Back to Ireland, you said that there's still disputes ongoing between Catholics and Protestants. Are the Protestant, do you mean like a specific denomination or just
Anglican,
Anglican?
which is the Church of England.
Oh, okay. Right.
The one that King George gave.
Right. It's Catholic light, because it's basically Catholicism without a pope.
It's because King George gave
Henry VIII.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wanted a divorce. Emily?
Why is it so important, like,
Because it's a question of faith. And so again, when you've got a government that's based on religion, it kicks it up another notch. Because if it's China, for that matter, look at China. What gives the emperor in China his validity? Mandate of heaven. The gods support and favor on the human ruler. If you look at the beginning of Islam, Allah conveys his favor on Muhammad, specifically Muhammad, by delivering his message through Muhammad and no one else. It's not like there was a line of people and Muhammad was one of 50, and God speaks through one for one verse and speaks through the second for another verse and speaks through the third for another verse, and it's all equally shared. It was only Muhammad. And so some people look at that and go, clearly this man was special in the eyes of God. Clearly God had a special covenant with Muhammad and nobody else, and we need to respect that. And so we need to keep that relationship strong. We need to follow Muhammad's descendant because he will have that same relationship with God. It's the same thing you look at in monarchy. You have a really good king. Clearly, who should take power after that really good king? His son. Right.
That doesn't always work.
Of course it doesn't always work, but people look at it in that context. That heredity is incredibly important in maintaining stability. Yes?
But he wasn't really like his, son-in-law, like his actual.
Right. But he's the best thing we got. And it was also his nephew, so there is still a kind of working your way around it hereditary link.
Nephew, I'm confused.
By what?
Son-in-law and nephew?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right, daughter marrying a cousin.
Oh, okay. This just having trouble figuring
Yeah,
out.
family trees could get very complicated long ago because, again, you're living in small communities. People don't typically travel far, far away.
I was having trouble figuring out.
Yep. Understandable. All right, so we good here? Anything else need to be explained? Yes, ma'am. Well, it's what would have happened if the Pope could have ruled a country. So, if the Christian Pope could have ruled Italy, it would be exactly the same as, Muhammad ruling the beginning of this Muslim empire. A country, a civilization, an empire based specifically on faith and on a religious leader. Now, what you see in Christianity is the Pope is never able to rule politically. He's able to influence governments in Italy and England and France and all these other places, but he never actually rules. So that's where it begins to separate. But that's a great question. Oh, there were times where the Pope had way more political power than any of the other kings were happy with. Yeah, but then there was also people like Charlemagne that instead of being crowned by the Pope, took the crown from the Pope and placed it on his own head. They don't like that much. Okay, so a couple more things on Islam just to clarify. Islam is what provides the unity for this early civilization. But what it does not do, and the movie talked about this too, it does not insist that people that are conquered convert. It does not insist that the people that are conquered have to convert. In fact, as this Muslim empire expands, they are predominantly interested in wealth, in conquering to enrich their civilization. Do we all need to say the word booty together just to get rid of the chuckles? It's hard not to laugh, isn't it? You say booty, you want to smile at the very least, even if not laugh. And the more often you say booty, it just gets funnier. We say booty 5 or 6 more times and people are just going to be laughing out loud. It's a little ridiculous, actually, but that's what you get. And so again, you have a limited desire for mass conversion because you want the booty. Because if the conquered people convert, you have to share the booty. You have no idea how much I'm enjoying this. And so this oftentimes appears to be a holy war. That we are going out in the name of Allah and we will conquer the infidel and we will make all of them kneel down and bow down to our God and become Muslims. Not even close. You people don't need to convert. Keep your God, keep your government. All we want is
Booty.
booty. Yes, sir.
So the Muslim people want it to be like an exclusive group for Islam, essentially.
Well, and think about it. This is a brand new religion. So this does feel like a special group. And think of what they had to go through for this religion to even survive. Muhammad had to get chased out of his home, get run off to Medina with a small group of followers who struggled to survive. They get a small following. They hike it back to Mecca and fight for their lives. When you've gone through that much, do you suddenly want to bring in everybody else and be like, yeah, we're all the same. You never fought at all. I almost got killed, but we're basically the same.
He just didn't want freeloaders.
Yeah. They want people to come to it honestly. Not out of fear, not out of greed, because they want their share of the booty, but because they truly believe in what God has said to man. Thinking about a question?
Yeah.
Stretching?
Wait, so Islam provides like a unified
conquest with the assumption that God was on their side and wanted them to do this. Now, as the empire grows, and especially once the empire reaches its geographical limits, which happens during the Abbasid Empire, then you're going to see a switch. Because by now, all the booty has been taken. So now conversion is going to be encouraged. Now you should want to convert and become a part of this established empire. But again, you still have this issue of the division within Islam. The division between Sunni and Shia. And so if you missed it before, here you can get it now, and maybe this is a little bit more clearly explained. When Muhammad dies, you have two groups. Those that believe Muhammad's descendant should rule, and those that don't. And this comes to a head when the third caliph is assassinated. An assassination is always a problem for societies. Because assassination is when one person decides to make a political decision for all people. And if it's in a monarchy, that's a problem, because typically the elites and or God are supposed to decide who rules. In a democracy, who's supposed to decide who rules?
Majority.
The majority of the people. And in either case, assassination is one person taking that power into their own hands and deciding, I don't think that person should rule, and I am going to change the government. That's why assassinations are such a big deal throughout history. Yes, sir.
You mean like with Julius Caesar?
Like with Caesar, like with Lincoln, like with Kennedy. Anytime a leader is murdered, it's one person saying, it's okay if I make this change for all people.
Was Lincoln in his second term when he was assassinated, or
Second.
how much time did he have left in it? Or was it shortly after?
A fair amount, like 3 years. And so this is where the cycle gets bloody. He was in the third year of his first term, campaigning for re-election. And so this is where it gets nasty. The third caliph, the Sunni caliph, is murdered. Ali is given power, but now you've got a revenge killing, and Ali is murdered. And so now the cycle of violence is established. The Sunnis are going to feel like they were targeted first. The Shia are going to feel like they were never given any opportunity, because Ali, the only time a Shia caliph was appointed, is murdered not long after he's appointed. And so now both sides have basically reached the point of being irreconcilable. We good here? Okay. Take another second. Do you guys have any questions at the moment? Because you've asked some really good ones so far. Sahil?
Like the Shia thing, like what Muhammad was preaching, that like it's not about the leader, rather it's like a big sword, then why was there such a debate on who rather than what they're saying?
If it was unclear as to what he meant by it doesn't matter.
Partly because it's unclear, but partly because a leader can be as humble as they want, but that doesn't always mean that the people that are following them agree with them. You know, if you have a great teacher, and that teacher, says, you know what, guys, it's all you. You're good students. It's not me. And I'm going to leave for 6 months, and we're just going to bring in somebody else. But, you won't have any problems because it's you guys that are making it work. Are you all going to buy that?
No.
You'd be like, no, please don't leave. You're awesome. We don't want somebody else. Same concept. However often Muhammad might say, look, it's not me. It's God. People are going to be like, yeah, okay, whatever. You're awesome. Nobody else speaks the way that you do. Nobody else explains God's words the way that you do. You can't go. And if you're going to go, we need Muhammad 2.0.
How did he manage to be so honest?
Yeah. Some people can do it. Yeah.
Like the conflict now, does it still have to do with the like descendants and stuff, or now
No. Now it's
Hatred.
now it's 600 years.
Just a feud.
Well, not even 600. What would that be?
1200.
Yeah, 1,200 years of violence and hostility. It's the same issues that you see with terrorism today. You could maybe trace it back to its original roots between Christians and Muslims, but that's not what it is. It's because 10 years ago, somebody's father was killed, and they took it personally, and now they want revenge.
So it doesn't have to do with this anymore. It's just like
It's not only about this. I mean, there are fundamental differences between what Sunnis and Shias believe, but it's the personal vendettas, the personal heartaches, the personal pains that people have felt as a result of the conflict that keeps the conflict going. And that's why it's so hard to stop religious conflict. That's why it's so hard to stop fighting over Israel between Israelis and Palestinians. Because it's not just about faith and it's not just about land, but it's about 60 years worth of personal tragedies that people can't just let go of.
So, how do the terrorists in the Middle East interpret jihad to mean ramming airplanes full of people and buildings full of people?
Same way that some Christians interpret Christianity to mean protesting outside of soldiers' funerals. Because people will take their religious beliefs and take them in a direction that they think they should go. And they will manipulate the words of their faith to get them to agree. That's why during the African slave trade, you had Christian slave owners in the South saying slavery is justified because, look, in the Bible it talks about there needs to be masters and there needs to be slaves, and slaves need to obey their masters. Clearly what we're doing is justified. Nope.
So I know like Muslims don't believe like Jesus is the son of God. But
Yep.
do they culturally have like anything to that?
Jesus was a prophet.
Yeah.
He was not the last prophet, and he was not divine.
Oh.
So does it help his case with the Muslims that he never claimed to be the son of God himself or something like that?
He does claim to be the Son of God
When? Oh, okay.
in the New Testament.
Really? When?
Oh yeah, in each of the Gospels.
What?
In each of the Gospels.
Really?
Yep.
I don't recall him ever-
But again, the New Testament is only used by Christians. And so at that point it becomes, well, that's your book, that's not my book. And so in the Quran, Jesus is not divine. Jesus, Muhammad, Abraham, Moses, they're all just prophets. They're all people that got the opportunity to bring God's word to the people, but Muhammad was the last and the best. Now, I realize this is really small, and so this may need to be something that you get off the website later if you're having problems seeing, and we don't want to turn you perpetually blind early in life. Yeah. But what we want you to see real quick is that early on in the Muslim Empire, society is broken up based on faith. The people at the top, the Ummah, are the first Arabs to convert to Islam. The original believers. They're the ones that are going to have all the political power. They're going to be the top officials in the military. They're going to have the greatest economic opportunities. They are the ones that are going to get
The booty!
the booty. And if there are parents listening to this, they're going to worry. Now, then you are going to have the people that are conquered and convert, either for financial reasons or because they truly believe in what the Muslims are teaching. That will be the Mawali. Now, despite the fact that they convert, they will not be given the same rights as the Ummah because they came later. Yes, ma'am.
But are technically aren't the Muslim Arabs also converts?
Yes, they are technically also converts. And so there is a little bit of hypocrisy here. But that happens.
But like you have the first, like,
Right. So and again, some of this is ethnic. So if you were on the Arabian Peninsula, maybe if you weren't necessarily one of Muhammad's first followers, but after the whole thing in Mecca, maybe you converted then, or maybe once the empire gets rolling, you converted. But you aren't like some Egyptian. You're not some Persian. You're not some Byzantine that converts. And then you have the people that don't convert, the dhimmi, the people of the book, people that received God's word in a different way, which means, who are we talking about?
Christians and Jews.
Christians and Jews. They have shared God's message, but they got part of it wrong. But according to the Quran, on the last day, all of God's people will be saved. And they don't just mean Muslims, they mean Jews and Christians, people that have also received God's word. And so the Muslims are content to allow Christians and Jews to retain their faith, to practice their faith without persecution, but they're going to pay a special tax. But that's all. So religious freedom comes with a price, but it's still religious freedom. Now again, as we said later, mentality changes, we accept converts, we encourage conversion, and later the Mawali and the Ummah will become the same group. And so as long as you have converted, regardless of when it was, you will now be a member of that upper echelon of society. Question? Oh, we're still going to have people at the very bottom of society. You will still have slaves, you will still have essentially peasants. That part hasn't changed. In fact, the very next bullet talks about the implementation of slavery. Sometimes these slaves will be captured non-Muslims. But the interesting thing here, and again, it's a very, very different portrayal of slavery from what you guys are used to. It is not southern plantation slavery in the 16 and 1700s.
Is the American or pre or colonial American slavery more the exception?
It is. Colonial American slavery, and for that matter, Atlantic slavery, where slaves were brought from Africa not just to the colonies, but also to the Caribbean and to South America. That was one of the, if not the, worst examples of slavery. The most brutal, the most inhumane. Slavery has existed throughout history. And again, I've told you this before, no little kid ever grows up saying, "Mommy, Daddy, I want to be a slave when I grow up." But slavery oftentimes was not hereditary. There were opportunities to improve your position and even to earn your freedom. Slaves could become trusted household servants that would never be beaten, would be given good clothing and good food, and would become a trusted advisor to the head of the house. Slaves could often become confidants, either for the men or the women in the house. Your slave could become your best friend, because you could feel like you could tell them anything because you're not on the same level, so they're not going to judge you. They could almost become essentially a counselor, a therapist, somebody to share your problems with.
Someone you can vent to when you need to.
Exactly. So again, you should not picture slavery. When I say the word slavery, for all of these early civilizations, you should not picture somebody, especially with darker skin, getting whipped. That's not what we're talking about. Not that that doesn't happen, but slavery is not racial throughout most of history. It's not finding the people that look different from you and dehumanizing them.
They were just unlucky enough to be taken from wherever they were.
Right.
When they are
And it's not like they're going to be treated inhumanely. Again, you don't want to be a slave. Slaves don't necessarily enjoy being slaves.
But it's nowhere near as bad as it was.
But it's nowhere near as bad as it was, yes.
I just went to a free
Sometimes, yes.
I recall
Like,
with
Rome, like, it's a priest to become like a wealthy merchant.
Yeah. And again, it's not like it happens to all slaves. It's not like all slaves are freed and move up and become wealthy. It's not like all slaves are beaten. What we're trying to do is provide a general view of what could happen, and then you just need to realize that when we talk about a group of people, you can't assume they were all treated the same way. Yes, sir.
I remember reading or hearing somewhere about, like, I think it was in Rome somewhere, in the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
There were these two brothers who were freedmen, and they got really wealthy in business and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the names, and I'm not even sure if they were freedmen or if they were just political or something and rose really high up
Yep.
in economic knowledge.
Totally possible.
About this much about the Colonial? Like, what example?
Totally possible. Last thing that needs to be discussed, role of women. Now, what do we know about women in Bedouin society? They got it good. Economic opportunities, social opportunities within the family. Even in some Bedouin tribes, women were allowed to sit on tribal councils, which means they've got political opportunities. We transition to this Muslim empire, and women's rights fall dramatically. And what's really interesting about this is that none of this happened because of Muhammad. Muhammad was all about women's rights. But as time progressed, society became more and more and more patriarchal. And so women were placed lower and lower and lower compared to men. Women's opportunities in the economy were more and more restricted. Laws were changed so that in many cases women could not seek divorce even if they were being abused, even if they were abandoned. They would not be allowed to remarry. Yes, sir. Yeah. And two of the things that you see that best characterize this transition. One is the creation of harems. And harems go hand in hand with the practice of polygamy. And polygamy is what? Multiple spouses. Now, women don't get to have multiple spouses, but men are allowed to have up to 4 wives as long as they can financially support all 4. In addition, they are also allowed to have mistresses, which is wife without the marriage, and concubines, which is not even girlfriend status, but you're still expected to provide all of the physical attributes of a relationship. Did I make that clear?
Unpaid prostitute.
We could say that too, but not over the microphone. And so the harem, you know how like wealthy people have like 4, 5, 6 stall garages, you know, for all their different cars and whatnot? Your harem's where you keep your women. It's a special part of the palace where all of your wives and mistresses and concubines are kept. Kept away from any of the other men, oftentimes guarded by special men called eunuchs who have had the snip done so that they can be trusted to guard your women without any shenanigans. And this is also primarily for the most elite men in society. This is not like your average peasant farmer has like 4 wives and 50 other girlfriends, because there's no chance he can afford this. This is for the most fabulously wealthy in society. So this is not something that applies to all men. We're talking about like 1% of the population, but it's a trend worth noting. Yes, sir.
Won't those women who are in the wives be jealous of each other?
Oh, insanely. Uh-huh. I mean, I don't know what guy thinks this is a good idea.
Wouldn't they kill each other?
Well, they would fight with each other, but they would do it in a sneaky way. We're not talking like, wrestling brawls or anything like that. It's all like, ostracizing and, sending servants, to other servants and, poisonings and things like that. Yeah.
But what's this like multiple wives and stuff like out of the
Yep. And the caliphs in particular, and then later the sultans, will be the ones that take the greatest advantage of this. There are sultans that, historical records document had literally thousands of mistresses. Again, I don't know who thinks that's a good idea, but they did it. The other thing that you see develop is the practice of veiling, where women are told that they need to cover first their bodies. So ladies, today you would not be allowed to wear 99% of what you wear. Not the short shorts, not the spaghetti strap tops, nothing low cut. You would need to be completely covered from head to toe because we need to protect men from spiritually impure thoughts. Yes, ma'am.
So like, this is, so like early on, like, this is like, kind of like for men, but this is mostly for women, like, more to protect their honor,
Mm-hmm.
for men to like be like, oh, you can't.
Well, and it's interesting where the social class thing comes into play too. Because, again, for the men at the top, they're able to take outrageous advantage of having multiple wives and lots of mistresses and things like that. For the people at the bottom, this isn't so much an issue. And so, like you said, for the people at the bottom, it definitely becomes more about women's honor and protecting their virtue and them choosing to do this voluntarily. But oftentimes for upper class women, and the reason this becomes a topic to discuss historically, and this is always the tricky part with history, is anytime you start mixing history and religion, there's the opportunity for disagreement or conflict or confusion. But from a historical perspective, as long as veiling is a choice, that's one thing. But what we see in some parts of this Muslim empire is that veiling becomes mandatory. That whether you want to or not, whether you are concerned with your personal honor or not, you must, because of the impact that it may or may not have on men. And so as the Muslim empire expands, you are going to see variations on this policy, and you'll see it come to be interpreted in different ways. And you still see that today in different Muslim countries. Some of them follow this practice, some of them make it optional, some of them make it mandatory. And you see the origins of that beginning here during these empires. Yes?
Is mandatory modesty really modesty, or is it just another decree issued from on high?
Mandatory modesty actually being modesty, that's probably a philosophical conversation.